Let's get into this race recap, the Dixie Vodka 400 from Homestead-Miami Speedway this past weekend. And I want to start with this because Homestead-Miami Speedway deserves a ton of praise after the showing this past weekend. And I want to go back to last year when we were starting to get inklings about what the 2021 schedule was going to look like. And even prior to that, actually, because when Homestead-Miami Speedway lost its date as the season finale, I think there was a lot of skepticism amongst the NASCAR community, myself included, about the future of that track. You know, with this new schedule, we got 7 road courses on the schedule, and obviously NASCAR's pushing to get back into more short track racing, back to their roots, right? The bread and butter right now are these mile-and-a-half tracks like Kansas Speedway, Las Vegas, and you throw Homestead in there as well. And I think this race proved that Homestead-Miami deserves its place on the schedule at this moment, because this was probably one of the best mile-and-a-half races that I have watched, and I mean a complete race where I was engaged throughout. There was a lot of mid-pack action, a lot of really good racing, and a lot of green flag passing. And that's one thing that this 550 horsepower package does not necessarily do well, right? Because it's dictated by aerodynamics and drivers that get behind in dirty air. If the lead car is able to block your air and block your forward momentum, there is no shot you're getting around him. You know, I look back to last year, Kansas Speedway in the playoffs between Joey Logano and Kevin Harvick. It's a perfect example where Kevin Harvick obviously had the faster car, but Joey Logano has proven to be quite an aggressive blocker in his career, especially as of late. Was able to block Kevin Harvick's line, stop his forward momentum, and just from there, it's impossible to get around the lead car when that air is blocked. So clean air is everything, man, with this 550 horsepower package. But we had 34 green flag passes this race, which is up from 30 in 2020 and 22 in 2019. So there was a lot of action, not even just in mid-pack, but up front as well. And we saw multiple grooves being used. We saw Tyler Reddick and company, you know, some of those guys rim riding, as Mike Joy put it, up there at the top of the wall. So we saw that work. We saw guys slide job from the bottom. We saw Chase Elliott. I don't know how he didn't get punted by Denny Hamlin early in that race, where he slid right up in front of him, and Denny Hamlin definitely cut him some slack there. But we had so much good racing throughout this race, and just bouncing off of that, this race was not dominated by one driver, let alone one driver that we had our eyes on prior to this weekend and leading up to this weekend. I mean, come on. So at some point, this track's going to have to be repaved, and it's going to lose its multiple groove surface. It's going to lose that gritty surface. You know, it eats tires and plays into the strategy even more so. But right now, I think Homestead-Miami is perfect. And it's races like these at tracks like these that we need in order to draw these fans to the sport, because we talk about Daytona, we talk about super speedway racing, we talk about road course racing, and you know, that's all great and fun, and I am all for the additions on this 2021 schedule. We need to shake it up. But at some point, you know, right now, this is the bread and butter in NASCAR, these mile-and-a-half tracks. And, you know, under the impression that we are going to be using this 550 horsepower package, unsure of what's going to happen when the next gen car rolls out next year. You know, it's races like these that we need on these tracks, and it's going to draw fans to the sport for sure. But I want to talk more about this 550 horsepower package in particular, because I got to give credit where credit is due. I hate this package. I do. You know, that Kansas race in particular turned me off a ton, even more so than I already was. So I got to give credit where credit is due, and as I keep saying, this race was great across the board, I thought. And you know, by 550 horsepower standards, it was a success. Now, I still think that we need to veer away from this package and get some horsepower back in these cars, and you know, put it in the hands of the drivers and not necessarily in the hands of just the technology and the aerodynamics of the cars. But nonetheless, this was a great race. And it was almost a breath of fresh air seeing so many new faces up at the top and dominating. I'm talking dominating. So with that said, it was William Byron who was able to get his second career Cup Series victory, his first with new crew chief Rudy Fugle. The pair won 7 races together in the Truck Series back in 2016, if we remember that. So they do have that connection together. And this is William Byron's first podium finish on a mile and a half, actually, as well. And William Byron came out swinging, dominated stage 3, basically wasn't even challenged, and came away with the win. But now let's take a look at the remaining results of this race, because like I said, you look at this top 10, and you look at just the entire race itself and some of the drivers that were dominating this race, and it's crazy to think about. William Byron takes home the win. I want to talk about Tyler Reddick, who came up just short in second place, but holy smokes, Tyler Reddick was hard charging there at the end. Cutting off basically almost a half a second of William Byron's lead a lap. And barring a caution, I mean, Tyler Reddick, the way that the track came to that 8 car, I mean, he was caught up in qualifying positions, had to start way back in the pack, wasn't necessarily able to get up there for most of the race, but that track came to that 8 team, man, and he was flying. It was crazy. I mean, Tyler Reddick, even in the Xfinity Series, driving for Our Motorsports, you know, a team that doesn't necessarily have great equipment or even sponsorship, drove to a second place finish, even though I believe that finish was disqualified. But nonetheless, Tyler Reddick is a machine at Homestead-Miami Speedway, and he's going to have to win. And you know what? Probably was going to have to win this race at any chance of a championship run, or a playoff run, rather. So, great showing for Tyler Reddick, but you got to believe that this team was really looking for that win. It was a track that, you know, we all were expecting Tyler Reddick to be a dark horse threat to win. And Tyler Reddick himself was frustrated at the end of the race. And, you know what, William Byron winning in 3 different winners to start the season, 3 winners that I don't think people thought were going to win a race this early this year, and who knows if they were going to win a race at all this year. I'm more so looking at Christopher Bell and or more so Michael McDowell, but still putting the pressure on some of these bubble drivers early, and Tyler Reddick is one of them. Martin Truex Jr., a 3rd place finish, was up there leading the race. Great showing for Martin Truex, considering the rest of Joe Gibbs and Toyota, for that matter, was non-existent today. Kyle Larson, as I mentioned, a great run. And I want to look at Michael McDowell as well, because Michael McDowell, I don't know what's in that man's Wheaties every Sunday morning, but that entire team is putting it together. And as I said when he won the Daytona 500, putting together clean races, being strategic, finishing top 15, top 20, that's what this team needs. And to start this season with 3 straight top 10 finishes is insane. He's the only one next to Kevin Harvick to do so this year. And I'm rooting for Michael McDowell. We should be rooting for this team, because we don't want them to just be a playoff filler that stole a spot. We want this team to be competitive, and we want this team to compete. So if they keep putting together these finishes, you know, this Front Row Motorsports team is really, I think, going to reap a lot of benefits if they continue this. Not just from sponsor exposure, but team exposure and all of the above. So continuing to impress here early on is Michael McDowell, and I'm all for it. I am all for it. I want to talk about Roush Fenway Racing right now, because they came out of the gates swinging. And I want to talk specifically about Chris Buescher, who dominated the first stage. I mean, took Brad Keselowski one-on-one, making some incredible passes and driving away. It was incredible. He set a career high in laps led during a race, and this team should be encouraged from this run. I mean, Chris Buescher's finish doesn't necessarily reflect the speed that he had. Just getting caught back in pit stops, had a poor restart, wasn't necessarily able to recover from that just as the track changed and as it got more cool. But Ryan Newman was fast, coming away with a 7th place finish, and Mike Joy noted in the broadcast that Jimmy Fenning, who was the crew chief for Kurt Busch back in 2004 when he won the championship, is now overseeing most operations coming out of Roush Fenway Racing. He was overseeing the Super Speedway program, and now he's overseeing most of the operations for all of these tracks, and it has shown immediately here at Homestead. Roush Fenway Racing has gained a lot of attention for their super speedway program and how good they are and how good they have been in recent years on super speedways. So is this going to start maybe pouring into some of these other tracks? It's going to be interesting to see if they can keep this going, but it's definitely a promising sign coming out of the gates at the first mile and a half for Roush Fenway Racing. And, just continuing this this storyline of these, drivers we're not used to seeing at the top. It's really great to see. It's really great to see. Kurt Busch is another one I want to touch on briefly, who somehow was able to fight back for an 8th place finish. Kurt Busch probably had one of the best cars of the day. Just the way he was able to hang around with some of these guys on old tires was really, really impressive. Unfortunately, had a loose wheel late in the race, but again, just showing how much of an advantage these new tires have on this track. I mean, Kurt Busch unlapped himself and drove his way back up to 8th place in a matter of maybe 30, 40 laps, if that. I can't remember exact. But holy smokes, we had some hard chargers here at Homestead this weekend, and Chris Buescher does win the Hard Chargin Award for throwing down fastest laps, a total of 39 here at Homestead-Miami this past weekend. So Chris Buescher becoming the first official winner. I know I teased this last week on the podcast, giving out a Hard Chargin Award. We're going to give it to the driver that lays down the most fastest laps every week. Chris Buescher is the first winner of that award. So, again, a lot of interesting players here on this list. But that's your race recap from Homestead-Miami Speedway. Again, great race. One of my favorites that I've seen in a while on a mile and a half. And, just a breath of fresh air for everything that we have seen over these past few years at mile and a halves. Very impressed. And again, congratulations to William Byron for an emphatic win. And who knows, maybe this could be the spark of a breakout season for Mr. Willie B.